Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star's daily sports podcast. It's Wednesday, June 17th, and I'm Blair Kerkhoff. The survey says Kansas fans are generally happy with their athletic department. The Star conducted a survey of KU athletics, sort of a snapshot of the moment in sports, and as you might expect, fans were happy with Bill Self and the basketball program, even though it's in the middle of an NCAA investigation, and they're mostly optimistic about a football program, even with little success to base that on. Beat writer Jesse Newell, who launched the poll, is here to talk about the process and the findings. After a break, you'll hear from KU Athletic Director Jeff Long and Missouri AD Jim Sturck. They were part of a program about college sports earlier this week, sponsored by the Kansas City Public Library and moderated by former USA Today college sports writer Steve Weberg. You'll hear Long and Sturck talking about the resumption of the Border War series in men's basketball, football, and other sports. So let's get started. Hey, Jesse, how you doing?
Doing good, Blair. How about yourself?
Doing fine. Hey, I really enjoyed this latest project of yours. I don't think if we've done something like this, I can't remember doing it at the Star, but you asked fans, I guess fans, anybody could have responded, and we'll get into that in a second too.
They did, Blair. Everybody did, yes.
to a KU athletics survey, and I thought it was the answers were interesting. A couple of them were surprising, and we'll get into that. But before we get into the responses of the survey, I want to ask you about the process. And first of all, how did the idea come about? And then how did you go about executing it?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are doing this at this point, and I'm just sort of a sucker for these. I know, for example, one of the sites that's my favorite is Fangraphs, which kind of does the nerdy side of baseball, the numbers side. And they were doing one every couple of weeks about whether fans thought baseball would be back for 2020. And I just noticed that every time they did a new one, I was clicking on it because I wondered what people thought. And I think it helps sort of shape also what we think, just kind of get the wisdom of the crowds with that. So I filled out, went on Google Forms, and actually they have a pretty nice setup when it comes to that, to be able to fill in your questions, kind of do everything in a very standard way. And then you basically open it up and you can get the results in here. And as I'm sure we'll talk about here, Blair, it's sort of, when I first put it out there, I just said, hey, anybody take this KU Athletics survey. But unfortunately for me, it quickly became a pastime of Missouri fans to come on and fill it out in a very funny for them, not as funny for me way to go in there and kind of, make fun of KU. So I had to go in there. I had to parse through a lot of different things. We ended up having 1174 on the responses, and I ended up basically accepting under half of that, about 530, because while KU fans were interested to share their opinions, Missouri fans were even more interested in sharing their opinions about KU. So kind of had to sift through that, and it was a little bit of a process to do it. But I think what we're left with is a good glimpse of the fan base, how they feel at this moment. And a lot of these things, I can't predict. I don't know how people feel. So it's kind of good to get their answers and get them in, survey form, in pie chart form, so people can look at them.
Right. And that's how it was presented on the Star's website in pie chart form. And you ran the gamut of questions. A lot of it centered on what fans think of Bill Self and the basketball program, Les Miles and the football program, and of course the job of athletic director Jeff Long. It just seemed like almost all the questions had some variation of their opinion of that. But let's just kind of start with some general observations of the responses. And as we do that, let's kind of set up where Kansas is athletically right now. Men's basketball, coming off a terrific season in which they finished the year ranked number one nationally. Of course, didn't get to play in the Big 12 or the NCAA tournament because of COVID. Football, in Les Miles' first year, won 3 games, including a conference game, beating Texas Tech. And that's the 3 victories matched the most for the program in the last decade. That's how bad a decade it's been for Kansas football. And Jeff Long was hired, I believe it was 2018. I think he's second year. He's got 2 years on the job, almost finished his second year at KU. So given that background, you asked for grades on Jeff Long and also had asked for evaluations of the progress of basketball and football. So let's at the beginning, let's just start with grades. It seemed like, correct me if I'm wrong, that Bill Self came out pretty good. About 75% are really happy with Bill Self in terms of got him an A, gave him an A grade, and more than half, slightly over half, are satisfied with Les Miles, who after like I said, one football season, 3 wins, and then Jeff Long below those two. Sort of in the BC range. If you're doing it by grade point average, probably a 2.5 for Jeff Long. What did you make of those responses?
Well, yeah. So let's start at the top. So Bill Self, I think the question here is how much are people still behind him? Obviously, he's a Hall of Famer. Everything on the court that he's done, the amazing success, the conference titles. He has the one national title. Maybe that's the only knock against him now at this point is he doesn't have a second. But if you look across the national landscape, there's very few coaches that have more than one, especially at the age that Bill Self is. So overwhelmingly, as I think we probably would have expected, 74% gave him an A, 18% gave him a B. And honestly, I tried my best to weed out the Missouri responses, but Bill Self got 16 Fs, which to me makes me think that I tried to get all the Missouri responses out, but maybe I missed about half of them because it's based off of the other responses. It seems very difficult to come to a conclusion that unless somebody just is frustrated with the violations and frustrated with how that all is turning out, for Bill Self to get an F grade seems kind of out of logic compared to the other responses. So yes, very happy with him. For KU fans are in that realm. Les Miles, I was a little surprised, but I think you spoke to the points. 51% gave him a B, 22% gave him a C, and 22% gave him an A. So the D and F grades are almost non-existent for him. So a very high grade for him in his first year, but you spoke to it. 3 wins for the program, matches the highest total in the last decade, and the sites aren't very high. So I think he was able to really extend his honeymoon period past the first season, which was a good accomplishment because, everything was working for him up until that point and everybody was so happy with him. But then you have to go play the games, and KU did play the games, and they got, a huge victory at Boston College for one and, picked off a couple at home. So yeah, I think that's good for Les Miles. We asked also about how many wins people expected for next season if a full season is played, and basically most were in the 3 to 4 range. So again, that's kind of the benchmark there. And if Les Miles continues that sort of progression, then he's going to be liked just fine around these parts. Jeff Long's, like you said, it was pretty mixed on his, and I think part of this might be just sort of bad timing for this survey for him, just because this is coming right after the very newsworthy settlement with David Beaty and his 15-month lawsuit, and KU paying $2.55 million to sell that lawsuit. Plus, as we reported in the Star last week, about $500,000 so far spent on lawyers' fees. So KU not coming out ahead, plus the bad PR they got, plus potentially affecting their NCAA case in a negative way. So all that seemed like a misstep from KU athletic department. So Jeff Long's grade might be a little bit affected based off of just recent events. But yeah, it seems like the jury is still out. I could definitely see a scenario there where a lot of the fans are looking at this and kind of gauging his job based off of what they feel is most important. And if we look at that, what most KU fans feel is most important is the basketball program. And last year, they were on track to be the number 1 overall seed. They were on track to be the favorite to win the national title. They still have Bill Self as their head coach. So things are going hunky-dory in that regard, at least in the most recent season that was played. So I think Jeff Long, a little bit of his grades reflected in that, and some of us reflected in this David Beaty situation as well. So I think the jury's still out on him almost 2 years into his tenure. But as far as Les Miles and Bill Self go, I think very, very good grades compared to potentially what they could be and probably would be for some of the other programs out there if you asked for fans to grade their coaches.
A big chunk of questions on the NCAA issues that Kansas faces, and you asked fans whether they think Kansas will receive a postseason ban as a result of the allegations. 2/3 said yes, they do expect that. But they, for some reason, don't believe that the 2018 Final Four banner will come down because of the allegations, even though the one of the subjects of the allegations is a player, Silvio De Souza, who played for the 2018 team and appeared in the NCAA games. So that plus the question of will Self be suspended as a result of the allegations? A majority said, slight majority, yes, and but then and you wrote this in your comments. Do you think Bill Self committed any NCAA violations? And 54% said nope, they didn't think Bill Self committed any NCAA violations. So how do we reconcile all of that? It just seems like fans understand that Kansas something bad happened, and Kansas might pay a penalty for it in terms of a postseason ban, but keep the banners up, and Bill Self, just is didn't shouldn't be blamed for the violations. Is that somewhat of a correct read?
Yeah, and again, with these polls, you're trying to get accurate data, and you're trying to make sure. I think it's good to parse all these out because they are kind of different compartments here. But I feel good in general about the responses here because I think this does reflect what you would expect from KU fans. And like you said, the fact that a majority of them didn't think the banner should come down, and over 50% of them don't think that Bill Self committed NCAA violations. I mean, that to me speaks to a fan base sort of thought. You know what I mean? Like they are going to stand behind their guy no matter what. So I think we go about one by one on these. About two-thirds think that KU is going to get a postseason ban. That seems to be sort of the reality of the situation. Honestly, I mean, it might be optimistic for 1/3 of those people to think no. I mean, just based off of what happened to Oklahoma State, even if there is this new independent process, I mean, do we think that they're going to completely let Kansas not suffer any postseason ban penalty based off of 5 level 1 violations? I mean, I think that even for 1/3 of people to say that's not going to happen, that's probably pie in the sky, and that's probably a little bit speaking to a fan base that is hoping for the best and trying to see things optimistically. The Final Four banner is kind of a point of contention probably. Maybe that won't happen. Maybe it will, but the Silvio De Sousa part that's linked in that, I think there's been a long time. I know there's been speculation from some of the national writers out there like Mike DeCourcy, from Sporting News, NBC Sports, Rob Doster, that banner is coming down. Even I know Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander have talked about it on CBS Sports before. So I think the national thought is basically that banner is going to be vacated, that Final Four is going to be vacated, but perhaps the fans don't feel that same way, and maybe those two things can be untied. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. The fascinating one to me was that over half thought that Bill Self would be suspended games. Less than half thought he violated NCAA rules. So I think the messaging out there that KU has tried to get across through its lawyers, through these statements it's made to stand up to the NCAA, it sounds like it's sort of been effective with KU fans, which is basically the point making that the NCAA is the bad guy here. They're trying to overstep their bounds. KU didn't, and Bill Self included, did not violate these bylaws, and the NCAA is taking an interpretation here that they shouldn't be taking. That's KU's argument, and it seems like by those two responses that some of these KU fans, or a lot of these KU fans, are buying that argument that KU is going to get, a postseason ban. Bill Self is going to get suspended, but they believe in their heart of hearts that Bill Self and KU actually didn't do anything wrong here, and that the NCAA is actually in the wrong and maybe trying to overstep its bounds. So again, kind of fascinating responses here. I also want to point out with the Bill Self, did he commit NCAA violations? 17% said they were undecided. So there's also a portion of that could easily be tipped to the yes or no side as well. So it seems like people are kind of trying to, as you said, reconcile their thoughts on all these matters, and to kind of separate those out, I think brought about some interesting responses.
Yeah, and the timing makes a difference here too. We're in the process. Kansas has, they've gone back and forth with the NCAA responding to the accusations, the allegations, and Kansas, there's been no determination of what's going to happen with Kansas, and when that happens, what Kansas would do in response. So a year from now, these same questions might be answered entirely differently. But as it stands right now, the fans still love Bill Self, is what I get from this. And yeah, you mentioned the undecideds, the 17% undecided. So you add that to the to the no answers. Do you believe Bill Self committed NCAA violations? And there are more than 70% of the people are basically not saying yes, saying either no or undecided. Which, as you said, it is very interesting. Okay, let's get on to a couple of the other. You also asked about relating to the COVID-19 and whether games will be played this year. First of all, I should say that fans are in favor of opening up Allen Fieldhouse to alcohol sales, more than half, and then also, do we think football and basketball are going to be played in 2021? Just straight out, not whether played without fans or a limited number of fans, but whether played at all. And it's funny and maybe again, this speaks to the timing as well, but majority no, majority yes with delays and cancellations, and for football and basketball, yes on time. A majority say they think it's going to start on time. So I don't think I was surprised by any of that, and I kind of agree with that. I think football is going to be that's we've heard Jeff Long talk about it earlier this week, that and Jim Sturk, the Missouri athletic director, that football might have some stops and starts along the way, and basketball may be just a little too far off in the distance to think that way. And to be honest with you, I think everybody who's a college sports fan is thinking football right now anyway, and there's a lot to consider with football.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing kind of we talked about with some of the early responses. I think people are voting with their optimistic minds here. And so the optimism here says, yes, you think NCAA football is going to play, even if it's with delays or cancellations, because that's what everybody's hoping for. And everybody's hoping that the world gets a little bit closer to normal. I think I was a little surprised with the NCAA basketball, where it is sort of flipped, where more people thought that it was going to start on time instead of with delays and cancellations, just because of the nature of football and basketball, which is football is, played outdoors, and, perhaps there's a little bit more that doesn't have to be considered in that sort of regard. And maybe the virus doesn't get transmitted as well in those sorts of settings, whereas basketball is indoors, and even the travel involved with playing a couple games a week and getting players from point A to point B, those sorts of things, it seems to maybe make things a little bit more difficult. But I don't think anything is too far out of the realm. Like I said, I think all of us are hoping that these things start back up, and nobody is probably clicking on the survey thinking, I'm going to go on here to make sure that I make my voice known that I think that everything is going to get shut down in 2020. So that's probably why those little tiny yellow slivers are in the pie charts there. Most people are trying to vote with their optimistic minds.
Right. And look, easier to spread out at a football stadium than in a basketball field house or arena.
Yeah, and you mentioned that didn't mention fans, so I think that's part of it as well. So this is not saying, hey, there'll be fans or won't be fans, and so that's part of what we have to take out. They could be playing basketball in front of empty arenas potentially, if that was the way to make it the safest, that sort of thing. So, but yeah, basketball is not that far in the future. That's the crazy thing. We think of it like, okay, that's a winter sport, it's way down the line, but late October, early November is when those preseason games are, and they're going to start conditioning and doing all the other things that normal college athletes do here in a few weeks. So that thing is not going to. It seems it's far away now, but it's probably not as far as everybody believes. And hopefully, we have more answers. We don't have a lot of answers right now, but hopefully, we get those here coming up next few months.
Yeah, I think if I had filled out the survey, I would have voted for the delay in basketball. I just think it'll be put off for a little while. And what's one of the big unknowns is we just don't know what football is going to look like for college sports, for the NFL or college. But maybe colleges will be taking cues for winter sports from what happens in the fall. Okay, Jesse, like I said, it was a terrific read. It's part of our story links, and of course it's on kansascity.com and kansas.com. But you're not finished with the survey. The survey is not complete. There is more to the survey. What's coming up?
Yeah, Thursday. Be sure to check out the Kansas State Stars. We'll have the second part of this, which is basically talking about some of the short answer questions in there. So we asked about what does KU Athletics do best? What could improve your experience with KU Athletics? Who is your favorite basketball player of all time? Favorite basketball player last year? Same thing with football. So some interesting responses in there. And, usually you can kind of lump some of those words together and figure out, hey, this is kind of how a majority or a bigger grouping of people feels about a certain topic. So some interesting answers in there, and we'll get a little bit more in depth into what KU fans think about the good and the bad when it comes to the athletic program that they support and the one that they watch over the most.
Well, looking forward to that. We are going to take a break here, and when we come back, you're going to hear from Kansas Athletic Director Jeff Long and also Missouri AD Jim Sturck, who participated in a forum on several topics earlier this week, sponsored by the Kansas City Public Library, with moderator Steve Weberg, former college sports writer for USA Today. And we're going to hone in on Jeff Long and Jim Sturck talking about the resumption of the border war and what it took to get Kansas and Missouri back together on the basketball court, which is scheduled to happen this December at Sprint Center, and then on the football field, which doesn't start until 2025, but the team signed a multi-year contract to resume the Border War series. So stay tuned for that, and we bid farewell to Jesse Newell. Jesse, thanks for stopping by and talking to us.
All right, no problem, Blair.
Hey, it's Blair. We have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns presented on the kansascity.com site, and it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. Your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star, and that support has never been more important. Please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening.
In a more normal time, we'd be preoccupied with the resumption of the rivalry, and that starts in basketball December 12th at the Sprint Center in Kansas City, and in football, because football's schedule is so far down the road, not till September of 2025, but in both of those sports and in other sports, somehow in a time of our country's deepest partisan divide, I guess we should credit you guys with finding detente. How did you do that? How did it happen? Was it a matter of the athletic directors, the leadership changing over at both of the schools? And kind of the elephant in the room here was Coach Self, the Hall of Fame basketball coach at the University of Kansas, who was adamant for a long time it was not going to happen. I assume that this wouldn't have happened without his nod of approval, and did he have to be cajoled? How did you all finally get it done?
Well, Jim, can I start on our side with Kansas?
Sure.
We might have had the bigger hurdle. I don't know that I want to speak for you, but, and I've said this before, but when I came to Kansas, I knew this. Having been an AD at three previous institutions, I wasn't going to walk in and tell Kansas Jayhawk fans and alumni what they should do with that Missouri game. That was not my place, and I made it clear. But from my opening press conference, there were questions. Are you going to play Missouri again? Are you going to play Missouri again? So, again, my approach was to listen, and we had a head coaches meeting where I wanted to listen and learn and understand the reasons. Certainly the obvious reasons Missouri left the conference. Got it. But it was a rivalry. It's one of the nation's oldest rivalries. And candidly, as athletic directors who are responsible for filling stadiums and generating revenue, just on the outside, it's a no-brainer. We should play because there is a great rivalry. And we talk a lot about this as in our AD circles, and the media does too. We're losing these rivalries. We're losing fans in the stands. And so, to me, the biggest propeller for me was I hate to see a rivalry die, one that has such tradition and so long in place that I needed to ask the questions. And, obviously, as you all know, widely publicized, Coach Self was, he was in a position at the time that things were changing in the Big 12 membership. So he was involved more than just the normal coach. I can't remember if he was acting when there was a interim AD or before there was an interim AD, but Bill was very much involved in decisions of the Big 12. So certainly it was personal for him. But again, like many things, we just started the conversation, and Bill engaged in the conversation. And I didn't push it, but I kept asking the questions. And I think Bill is a very thoughtful man. He's a very thoughtful coach. He continues to think about things, and 99% of the time, he arrives at a great place. Even if you disagree with him, he arrives at a place because he's thought it through to the nth degree. So, you know what? When he got to that point, he recalled, which I did not see, and Jim, I think you did, the charity game and the passion that was there and the rivalry was there. And he, in that first meeting, he talked about that. And so I think that seed kind of grew with him, and he got comfortable with it. And I think he saw, again, a rivalry dying and saw a chance to reignite it before it totally went away. And again, Jim and I have talked about this as we were putting it back together. Is we want this to come back with all the passion that our fans have, but also in a way that promotes more sportsmanship than may have been there in the past. Doesn't mean we're not passionate. Doesn't mean we're not spirited. But, I think we both want our fans to come back with a sense of sportsmanship, and that we can bring this back in this rivalry will benefit both schools. So thanks for giving me a chance to talk about it.
That's great. And
Jim, I know it wasn't a hard sell at Missouri, right?
I had the same question when hired, and actually there were some for, some against, they people didn't want it, but just like Bill, I think I saw the passion around the charity game, and that charity game came about for hurricane relief, and we raised over $2 million for hurricane relief that year. So it was special, and it was, I was wow, this is a charity game, doesn't mean anything, but all the people were excited to be there at the Sprint Center, and obviously they're excited about it coming back. But when we announced it, I have to tell this story, and I shared it with you all. But John Anderson of ESPN, who's an alum of Mizzou, he said, you and Jeff deserve the Nobel Peace Prize for bringing this back, and it was funny, but it was because Jeff I've known a long time, and I could reach out and say, Jeff, I know you're just hired. Congratulations, and oh, by the way, your daughter's coming here, and she's a good Mizzou alum, and but that when the time is right, let's talk about it. And it didn't happen right away, and we started to talk, and we started to talk football first, but then basketball came about, and ended up getting that done sooner rather than the football games.
And what about other sports? Should we assume that this will extend to other sports, and where are those discussions?
Yeah, in fact, I think softball played in a tournament against Kansas, and there'll be other sports that are scheduled, and those the ADs aren't as involved, but other than to say, reach out to your counterpart and let's get that scheduled, especially in these times where you want closer games where you don't have to fly, and it's a great game for all our sports to participate in.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a number of sports that are talking. Some that, Jim, I think they're already scheduled, but I don't have the detail for it. We haven't announced it, but they're scheduled, and that's healthy. And again, think about it from our Olympic sports standpoint. They get to compete against another 85 school that will have a good RPI, and they're 2.5 hours away. They're a bus trip. So, I mean, it makes all the sense in the world, especially at this time when we're starting to regionalize competitions to save money. So it makes all the sense. And trust me, those rivalries in tennis and volleyball and women's basketball, those are intense rivalries too. So, and student athletes, they want to play in front of fans and passionate fans. And So I'm excited for them as well as our football and basketball programs.
Well, my guess is that if you guys can maybe get Texas and A&M back together and say getting West Virginia back together, then you can think about that Nobel Prize.
We'll go on the road. Jeff is used to that. He can do that. Talking to all those folks through the football committee.
That will do it for today. Thanks to our production staff of Derek Donovan, Savannah Smith, Randy Mason, Beth Welsh, Jeff Rosen, and Chris Fickett. Tip of the cap to Jesse Newell for joining me today to talk about the KU Athletics surveys. You can find the story and other stories about KU Athletics on the links in the show notes and on kansascity.com. Hey, earlier in the episode, you heard me talk about the Sports Pass offer, and it still stands, still a good one, $30 for a year's worth of sports coverage. And that includes the Sports Extra on the e-edition. I was just looking at it. There's 30 additional pages of national sports coverage today. Well, here's an even better offer. Buy the entire Kansas City Star product. News, sports features, commentary, analysis, the whole thing. You get all the stories written by my talented colleagues, plus extra news, sports, and business coverage from a national perspective. The details can be found at account.kansascity.com/subscribe. That's account.kansascity.com/subscribe. And whether it's the Sports Pass or the full subscription, you're getting and supporting the best sports and news coverage in Kansas City and helping us produce programs like SportsBeat KC. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back on Thursday with another episode.